Kethvar had been watching humans fight for 3 weeks now, and his rest cycles were getting worse. What he had seen at New Denver was not unusual. It was normal. Every human battle followed the same impossible pattern of tactical brilliance mixed with emotional chaos. He moved his hidden ship to the Proxima system, where human forces were defending a massive space station. Proxima Station housed 2 million civilians and served as a major supply hub for the human fleet. The Thrakari wanted it badly, and they had sent a full battle group to take it. The human defense was led by Admiral Patricia Hill, commanding from the battleship Vengeful Spirit. She had 12 ships against a Thrakari force of 30 vessels. The mathematics were simple. The humans would lose and 2 million people would die or be enslaved. But Admiral Hill did not seem concerned about mathematics. Her first order made no sense to Kethvar. All ships' defensive positions around the civilian evacuation routes. We're not here to win. We're here to buy time. Every minute we hold them is another 1,000 people who get away safely. The Admiral was planning to lose. She was accepting defeat before the battle started. But instead of surrendering, she was organizing the most efficient defeat possible. It was like watching someone plan their own funeral while they were still healthy. The Thrakari assault began with long-range missile strikes. Human point defense systems worked desperately to intercept the incoming weapons. But there were too many. Several missiles got through and damaged the station's outer sections. Captain Helen Foster commanded the Marine Battalion defending the station's docking bays. When Thrakari boarding pods began attaching to the hull, her troops moved to repel the invasion. But Foster did something that made Kethvar question human sanity. She brought a medical team with her to the fighting. Doc Martinez. "You stay behind the barricades," Foster told the human medic as plasma fire filled the corridor. "But if anyone goes down, ours or theirs, you patch them up." Dr. Elena Martinez nodded and began setting up a field hospital in the middle of a combat zone. As the fighting intensified, wounded soldiers from both sides were brought to her position. She treated them all with equal care, saving human and Thrakari lives without distinction. Kethvar watched through his sensors as Martinez worked on a wounded Thrakari soldier, while human Marines died around her. The alien had been shooting at humans moments before, but Martinez spent precious medical supplies keeping him alive. "Why are you helping me?" the Thrakari soldier asked in broken human language. Martinez looked up from her work, sweat dripping from her face. "Because you're hurt and I'm a doctor. That's all that matters right now." The fighting raged for hours. Foster's Marines held the docking bay against wave after wave of Thrakari boarders. They used every trick of urban combat, turning the station's corridors into a maze of death traps and ambush points. But what disturbed Kethvar most was how the humans treated their dying enemies. When a Thrakari soldier was mortally wounded, the humans would gather around him and try to comfort him in his final moments. They would speak to him in his own language, telling him that his death had meaning and that his family would be proud. Private Gary Phillips sat with a dying Thrakari officer, holding the alien's hand as life left his body. "You fought well," Phillips said in halting Thrakari. "Your ancestors are waiting for you. Go in peace." This behavior served no tactical purpose. It wasted time and resources. It exposed the humans to emotional trauma that could affect their combat performance. But they did it anyway, for every enemy soldier who died in their care. The space battle around the station was equally confusing. Human ships fought with desperate skill, but they also did things that made no military sense. When the destroyer Hampton was crippled by Thrakari fire, Captain Ryan Davis could have abandoned ship and saved his crew. Instead, Davis used his dying ship as a weapon. But before ramming the nearest Thrakari cruiser, he did something unprecedented. He broadcast a message to the enemy fleet. "Thrakari Commander, this is Captain Davis of the Hampton. My ship is finished, but my crew is still alive. I'm transmitting our evacuation pod frequencies. Please allow them safe passage. They are no longer combatants." The Thrakari commander surprisingly agreed to the request. As the Hampton crashed into the cruiser, destroying both vessels, Thrakari ships actually provided cover for the human escape pods. Enemy soldiers were protecting human survivors because a human captain had asked them to. Kethvar could not understand this exchange. Davis had gained nothing by requesting mercy for his crew. The Thrakari could have ignored the request, but somehow the human captain's honesty and concern for his people had moved the enemy commander to show mercy. On the station, The evacuation was proceeding faster than expected. Human civilians moved in orderly lines toward the transport ships, but they were not just saving themselves. Every human family was assigned to help evacuate Thrakari, civilians who had been trapped on the station. When the battle started, "We don't leave anyone behind," explained Transport Coordinator Janet Kim when a Thrakari family hesitated to board a human ship. Human Thrakari doesn't matter. We're all people trying to survive. The Kim family personally escorted a group of Thrakari children to safety, even though it meant giving up seats on the first transport ship. They waited for the next evacuation flight, risking their lives to help enemy civilians. As the battle continued, more impossible human behavior emerged. Ensign Matt Rivera led a squad of Marines to rescue Thrakari prisoners who were trapped in a damaged section of the station. The area was filling with toxic gas, and retrieving the aliens served no strategic purpose. "Sir," one of Rivera's Marines asked, "why are we risking our lives for enemy prisoners?" Rivera sealed his helmet and checked his oxygen supply. "Because if we don't, they'll die scared and alone. Nobody deserves that, not even our enemies." The rescue mission cost Rivera his life when a bulkhead collapsed, but his squad managed to save 18 Thrakari prisoners. The aliens were so moved by Rivera's sacrifice that several of them volunteered to help with the station's defense. Kethvar observed former enemies working together to repair damaged systems and evacuate civilians. Thrakari engineers helped human technicians restore power to critical systems. Human medics trained Thrakari civilians in basic first aid. The distinction between friend and enemy was dissolving in the face of shared survival needs. The most disturbing incident occurred when a group of human children became separated from their families during the evacuation. They were found by a Thrakari patrol unit that should have taken them prisoner. Instead, the alien soldiers spent 2 hours searching for the children's parents, protecting the humans from combat zones and sharing their emergency rations. When the children were finally reunited with their families, the youngest human girl gave her Thrakari protector a drawing she had made. It showed human and Thrakari figures holding hands under a bright sun. The alien soldier kept the picture, tucking it carefully into his armor. "Thank you for keeping us safe," the little girl said to the towering alien warrior. The Thrakari soldier knelt down to her level, his voice gentle despite his fearsome appearance. "Thank you for reminding me why we fight. Not to hurt others, but to protect what matters." After 16 hours of continuous combat, Admiral Hill made the decision to abandon Proxima Station. The evacuation was complete, and the human fleet was too damaged to continue fighting. But even in retreat, the humans did something that defied explanation. They transmitted the station's environmental control codes to the Thrakari commander, along with detailed repair manuals and supply inventories. Hill was giving the enemy everything they needed to restore the station to full operation. "Why would you help us repair what we have taken from you?" the Thrakari commander asked during the surrender negotiations. Admiral Hill's response was broadcast across all channels, ensuring that both human and Thrakari forces heard her words. "Because this station will house people, and people need clean air and working systems to survive. It doesn't matter which people. Life is life, regardless of the species." The Thrakari accepted the human surrender with unusual ceremony. Instead of gloating over their victory, they honored the human dead with military rituals typically reserved for their own fallen warriors. They acknowledged the courage and honor shown by their enemies. As the human survivors departed in their damaged ships, many Thrakari soldiers stood at attention in a gesture of respect. The battle had been won, but both sides seemed to understand that something more important than territory had been exchanged. Kethvar watched the aftermath with growing psychological distress. His analytical mind could process the tactical elements of the battle, but the emotional components were creating system errors in his thinking patterns. The humans had lost completely. They had failed to hold Proxima Station. 2 million civilians had been evacuated successfully, but the strategic position was now in enemy hands. By any logical measure, this was a devastating defeat, but the humans acted like they had won something important. They mourned their dead, but they also celebrated the lives they had saved. They spoke with pride about enemy soldiers who had shown mercy and courage. They treated the battle like a shared tragedy rather than a competitive contest. That night, Kethvar experienced his first nightmare. The nightmare that would break Kethvar began in the Kepler 442 system. He had been observing human warfare for 2 months now, and his psychological state was deteriorating rapidly. Sleep came in fragments filled with alien faces and impossible memories. His logical processes were contaminated with something the humans called empathy. The Thrakari had deployed their ultimate weapon against 3 human colonies in the system. Biological warfare. Engineered viruses that targeted human DNA specifically, designed to kill slowly and painfully while leaving infrastructure intact for later occupation. Kethvar expected the human response to match the escalation. Surely this would push them beyond their emotional limitations and into pure survival mode. They would abandon their strange compassion and fight like rational beings. He was completely wrong. Admiral Susan Clark commanded the human relief fleet from her flagship, the carrier Salvation. When her ships arrived in the system, they found 3 worlds dying slowly. Millions of humans were infected with the biological weapon, and they had perhaps days to live. But the colonies also housed Thrakari civilian populations, guest workers and their families who had been living peacefully among the humans before the war began. The virus did not affect them, but they were trapped on the infected worlds with no way to escape. Clark's first order defied every principle of military logic that Kethvar understood. All ships, begin immediate evacuation operations. Priority targets are the infected population centers. We get our people out first, then we evacuate the Thrakari civilians. Captain Robert Young commanded the evacuation ship Northern Star. His response to the order summarized the impossible human perspective. "Admiral, shouldn't we evacuate the healthy populations first? The infected humans are going to die anyway." Clark's reply was broadcast across the entire fleet, ensuring everyone understood the mission parameters. "Captain, we don't abandon people because they're dying. We especially don't abandon them because they're dying. Every human who wants to go home gets to go home. Every Thrakari family who wants safety gets safety. We save everyone we can, and we do it with honor." The evacuation began under impossible circumstances. Human ships landed on worlds where the air itself was poisoned, where their own people were dying in agony from engineered diseases. The logical response would have been to enforce strict quarantine protocols and minimize exposure. Instead, the humans sent medical teams to treat infected populations while organizing the evacuation. Dr. Amy Johnson led a team of volunteers who knew they were signing their own death warrants by entering the contaminated zones. "We can't cure this thing," Johnson explained to her medical staff as they prepared to enter the first infected city. "But we can make their last days easier. We can help them die with dignity instead of alone and afraid." Kethvar watched through his sensors as human medical teams worked around the clock to provide palliative care for dying patients. They administered pain relief, provided psychological comfort, and helped infected humans record final messages for their families. But most disturbing to the Zephyrian observer, they provided the same care to infected Thrakari civilians. The biological weapon had been designed to target humans specifically, but some Thrakari had contracted secondary infections that were equally fatal. Human doctors treated them with the same dedication they showed their own species, using precious medical supplies to ease alien suffering. Lieutenant Gary Phillips commanded a Marine unit assigned to evacuation security. His squad was ordered to escort Thrakari civilians to safety, but they encountered a group of infected Thrakari children who had been abandoned by their own people in panic. "Sir," Sergeant Tony Martin reported, "we've got 8 Thrakari kids here. They're sick and their parents are nowhere to be found." "Orders?" Phillips looked at the dying alien children, small beings who reminded him of his own daughter back on Earth. Military protocol said to focus on the primary mission. Tactical thinking said not to waste resources on enemy civilians who were going to die anyway. "We take them with us," Phillips decided. "Get Doc Martinez over here. Those kids need medical attention." The evacuation of the infected Thrakari children required Phillips to commandeer a medical transport that had been designated for human casualties. His decision saved the alien children's lives, but it meant that several human patients had to wait longer for treatment. When questioned about his choice by his superior officers, Phillips gave an answer that exemplified the human approach to warfare. "Sir, they were kids and they were scared. What else was I supposed to do?" The most psychologically damaging incident for Kethvar occurred during the evacuation of New Terra Colony. Private Tony Martin was working with a medical team when they discovered a group of human and Thrakari families who had been sheltering together in an underground bunker. The humans were infected and dying. The Thrakari were healthy but trapped with no way to reach the evacuation zones. Both groups had been sharing their limited supplies for weeks, keeping everyone alive as long as possible. Martin's team had enough medical supplies to treat either the dying humans or to ensure the Thrakari families reached safety, but not both. The logical choice was obvious. Save the healthy aliens and let the humans die quickly from lack of treatment. Martin made a different choice. He gave the medical supplies to the Thrakari families, not to save them, but to help them take care of the dying humans. He trained the aliens in basic medical procedures and showed them how to administer pain relief and comfort care. "You're giving up your chance to save human lives," the Thrakari father said, confused by Martin's decision. Martin was quiet for a moment, looking at the mixed group of families who had been taking care of each other in the bunker. "No, sir, I'm saving all the lives I can. Your people can help our people die easy, and our people can help your people get home safe. That's how this works." Kepler intercepted Martin's final transmission to his pregnant wife before the Marine died from exposure to the biological agent. The message contained no anger about his sacrifice, no regret about his choices. "Karen, I want you to know I did good work here. I helped some kids get home to their families, and I made sure nobody died alone and scared. That Thrakari family I told you about, they're going to make it out. They're going to tell their kids about the humans who helped them when everything was bad." Martin's voice was weak but calm as the virus attacked his system. "Tell our daughter that Daddy helped people when they needed help. Tell her that's what humans do. We help people even when it's hard, even when it costs us everything." The transmission ended with Martin singing a lullaby, the same song he had planned to sing to his unborn daughter. But he was singing it to a dying Thrakari child who had been abandoned by her own people, holding the alien infant as they both slipped away. Kepler experienced his first complete psychological breakdown while recording this incident. His analytical systems could not process the contradiction of Martin's behavior. The human had chosen certain death to provide comfort to an enemy child, who was going to die anyway. There was no tactical advantage, no strategic benefit, no logical reason for the sacrifice. Martin had simply chosen to die holding a frightened child, so she would not face death alone. The evacuation of the Kepler 442 system took 3 weeks. The human fleet saved over 2 million infected humans and 300,000 Thrakari civilians. They evacuated entire cities under combat conditions while providing medical care to dying populations. But the cost was devastating. Over 50,000 human military personnel died from exposure to the biological weapons. They had volunteered for certain death to save people who were already doomed. Admiral Clark herself died on the last day of the evacuation, having spent weeks in contaminated environments organizing the rescue operations. Her final order was transmitted from her deathbed aboard the Salvation. "To all surviving ships, mission is complete. Every person who wanted to go home is going home. Every person who needed help got help. We did what humans do. We took care of each other, and we took care of our neighbors regardless of species." The Thrakari response to the evacuation was unprecedented in their military history. High Command issued a formal apology for the biological attack and established new rules of engagement that prohibited weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations. More significantly, the Thrakari began reciprocating human mercy in their own military operations. When they captured human colonies, they established medical facilities and provided humanitarian aid. They began treating human prisoners according to the same standards that humans had shown Thrakari captives. The war was transforming both species in ways that military strategists had never anticipated. The humans were teaching their enemies how to be more humane, even while the conflict continued. But for Kepler, the transformation was personal and terrifying. His sleep cycles had completely collapsed. He spent his rest periods experiencing vivid memories of events he had only observed, feeling emotions that belonged to dead humans and aliens. He dreamed of Tony Martin singing lullabies to dying children. He felt Gary Phillips's determination to save enemy civilians. He experienced Amy Johnson's compassion for infected patients who had no hope of survival. These were not his memories, but somehow they had become part of his consciousness. The Thrakari ships came out of hyperspace like metal thunderclouds. Kethavar watched from his hidden position as 3 massive cruisers and a battle carrier took formation around New Denver. Each Thrakari cruiser was twice the size of the human destroyer. The carrier was 10 times larger. This would not be a battle. This would be an execution. Captain Jake Morrison's voice crackled across the communication channels. All civilian transports begin immediate evacuation. Military vessels prepare for engagement. We buy them time, whatever it costs. Kethavar observed the human response with scientific interest. 5 small ships against overwhelming force. The humans should surrender now. Any rational species would, but the human ships moved into attack formation instead of fleeing. The USS Defiance led the charge, its damaged engines pushing it toward the Thrakari line. The other ships followed, a frigate called Liberty, 2 corvettes named Eagle and Falcon, and a supply ship that had no business being in combat. The supply ship was called Home Runner, and it should have been running home instead of staying to fight. This is stupidity beyond measure, Kethavar said, recording everything with his sensors. The humans were about to teach him what hopeless looked like. The Thrakari opened fire first. Their plasma cannons lit up space with green death. The human ships scattered and returned fire with their primitive kinetic weapons, metal slugs against energy shields. It was like throwing rocks at a mountain. But something strange happened. The human weapons found their targets. The metal slugs punched through Thrakari shields and tore holes in their hulls. The humans were aiming for specific weak points that should have been impossible to hit in moving combat. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Brooks commanded the frigate Liberty. Her ship was already damaged from previous battles, with half its weapons offline and a cracked reactor. Any sane commander would have kept it in the rear, but Brooks pushed her ship between the Thrakari carriers and the civilian transports. Liberty to all civilian ships. Her voice was calm despite the chaos around her. We've got you covered. Take your time. Get everyone out safe. A Thrakari cruiser focused its fire on the Liberty. The human frigate's shields collapsed in seconds. Plasma beams carved through its armor like hot knives through soft metal. The ship was dying and everyone knew it. But instead of retreating, Brooks did something that made Kethavar question his understanding of logic. She turned her dying ship toward the largest Thrakari cruiser and pushed her engines to maximum power. Liberty to fleet, Brooks transmitted. My reactor's going critical. I'm taking one of them with me. Tell my kids I love them. Tell them Mommy kept the bad guys away. Before anyone could respond, Brooks activated her ship's communication system one more time, but instead of tactical information, she began reading names. Johnny Martinez, you tell your wife that baby girl is going to be beautiful. Sam Wright, your mom's birthday is next week, don't forget. Kelly Adams, that book you wanted to write, someone needs to finish it. She was talking to her crew members, giving personal messages as her ship accelerated toward the enemy. One by one, she spoke to each of the 43 people about to die with her. She knew them all. She knew their families, their dreams, their fears. The Liberty slammed into the Thrakari cruiser at full speed. The explosion lit up space like a small star. When the light faded, both ships were gone. 43 humans had died to kill 300 Thrakari soldiers. Kethavar stared at his readings, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. The exchange was militarily sound, trading a damaged frigate for a cruiser. But the emotional component made no sense. Why waste time on personal messages when tactical coordination was needed? The battle continued around the planet's surface. Thrakari dropships landed near the mining facilities, and human ground forces moved to intercept them. Kethavar shifted his sensors to watch the surface fighting. Sergeant Pete Collins led 12 Marines against a Thrakari landing force of 200 soldiers. The numbers were impossible, but Collins positioned his troops in the mining tunnels and began a fighting withdrawal toward the main settlement. We hold them here, Collins told his squad over the radio. Hospital's got 30 kids in it and the transports ain't loaded yet. We don't let those bastards through. The Thrakari advanced with energy weapons and plasma grenades. The humans responded with chemical explosives and kinetic rifles. It should have been over in minutes, but the Marines used the tunnels like a maze, hitting the aliens from unexpected angles and disappearing before return fire could find them. For 3 hours, 12 humans held off 200 Thrakari soldiers. They lost half their number in the first hour, but the survivors kept fighting. When their ammunition ran low, they switched to mining equipment as weapons. When that broke, they fought with knives and tools. Kethavar watched Private Danny Wright drag a wounded Thrakari soldier to safety while enemy fire exploded around them. The alien had been trying to kill Wright moments before, but the human couldn't leave him to die in the tunnel collapse. "You're hurt bad," Wright said to the Thrakari in broken alien language. "Don't move. I'll get you help." The wounded alien looked up at Wright with confusion. "Why do you save me? I came here to kill your people." Wright was quiet for a moment as he bandaged the alien's wounds with his own medical supplies. "Because you're hurt and I can help. That's enough reason for me." This made no sense to Kethvar. Wright was wasting medical supplies on an enemy soldier. Those supplies might be needed for human wounded later. It was tactically unsound and logically flawed, but Wright continued treating enemy wounded throughout the battle. When Thrakari soldiers surrendered, he made sure they received medical attention. When human forces found alien bodies, Wright insisted on proper burial procedures according to Thrakari customs. "They're still people," Wright explained to another Marine who questioned his actions. "Dead is dead, doesn't matter what side they were on." The surface battle lasted 6 hours. The humans were eventually overrun, but they had bought enough time for the civilian evacuation to complete. Every transport ship escaped safely. The mining colony was lost, but 50,000 human civilians lived because 12 Marines had refused to retreat. In space, the remaining human ships continued their hopeless fight. Captain Morrison's destroyer was barely functional, but it kept firing at the Thrakari formation. The 2 corvettes darted between the larger ships like angry insects, their small weapons chipping away at enemy armor. The supply ship Home Runner should have evacuated with the civilians, but its captain, Susan Clark, had other ideas. She used her ship's cargo manipulators to grab debris from destroyed vessels and hurl it at Thrakari ships like massive projectiles. "Home Runner to defiance," Clark transmitted. "I know this bucket wasn't built for fighting, but we're not leaving without you." Morrison's response surprised Kethvar. "Susan, get out of here. Your ship's not armed. There's no point in dying for nothing. Jake, we've been friends since flight school. I'm not running while you're still fighting. Besides, someone needs to make sure you idiots don't do anything stupider than usual." Clark's supply ship rammed a Thrakari corvette, using its heavy construction to crush the smaller alien vessel. The impact destroyed both ships, but Clark had transmitted coordinates of a weak point in the Thrakari formation before she died. By the end of the battle, all human ships were destroyed or disabled. The Thrakari had won completely. They controlled the system and the colony, but they had paid a price that seemed far too high for such a small victory. 3 Thrakari ships were destroyed, and 2 more were heavily damaged. Over 1,000 alien soldiers were dead or wounded. The human force had been outnumbered 10-1, but they had made the enemy bleed for every meter of ground. Kethvar reviewed his recordings as the Thrakari fleet moved on to their next target. He had expected to see human weakness and incompetence. Instead, he had seen something that disturbed him deeply. The humans had fought with a combination of tactical skill and emotional intensity that he had never encountered before. They cared about their enemies even while killing them. They sacrificed themselves for civilians they had never met. They treated war like a personal tragedy instead of a strategic necessity. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to fight harder when the odds were hopeless. Logic said they should have surrendered or retreated, but they had chosen certain death over abandoning their responsibilities. That night, for the first time in his 500-year life, Kethvar had trouble entering his normal rest cycle. Images of the battle kept playing in his mind. Lisa Brooks reading names to her crew, Danny Wright treating enemy wounded, Susan Clark refusing to abandon her friends. Sleep had always been automatic for Zephyrians. Their minds simply shut down for 6 hours each day, then reactivated, refreshed and clear. But now Kethvar found himself lying awake, thinking about things that should not have mattered to him. He was supposed to be observing and reporting, but somehow watching humans die had affected him in ways he did not understand. Something was wrong with his psychological systems, and he suspected it had to do with what humans called emotions. The next day, he set course for the next battle zone, hoping this had been an unusual example of human behavior. He needed to see more combat to get a proper sample size for his report. Agent Kethvar stood in the crystal chamber deep beneath the surface of Zephyr Prime. The blue light from the walls made his silver skin shine like metal. He had been called here by the High Command, and that never meant good news. His long fingers touched the communication device on his neck as the message began to play. Agent Kethvar, You have been chosen for a special mission. The voice of Commander Veltar echoed in the empty room. The humans are at war with the Thrakari hegemony. We need to know which side will win. You will go to human space and watch them fight. Learn their ways. Study their methods. Report back to us. Kethvar had done this kind of work before. He was good at hiding and watching. His people, the Zephyrians, had technology that could make him invisible to most species. They had stayed out of wars for thousands of years, but now they needed to pick a side. The galaxy was changing and neutrality was becoming dangerous. The agent walked to the data station and pulled up files about humans. They were a young species, only recently reaching the stars. Their technology was basic compared to the Zephyrians. They had no energy shields, no quantum weapons, no mind control devices. They used simple projectile weapons and chemical explosives. Their ships were crude metal boxes with fusion engines. Primitive, Kethvar said to himself as he read the reports. Humans had only been in space for about 200 years. The Zephyrians had been traveling between stars for over 10,000 years. How could such a young species survive a war against the Thrakari hegemony? The Thrakari were different. They were old, almost as old as the Zephyrians. They had good technology and strong ships. They had been conquering smaller species for centuries. Their empire covered dozens of star systems. Most species either joined them or died fighting them. There was rarely a third option, but the humans were fighting back. That was interesting. Most young species surrendered quickly when the Thrakari came. The report said humans had been fighting for 3 years now. They had lost many worlds, but they kept fighting. Some called it bravery. Others called it stupidity. Kethvar gathered his equipment. He would need his stealth suit, the one that bent light around him. He would need his observation tools, devices that could record everything he saw and heard. He would need a ship, something that could get him to human space without being detected. The Zephyrians had captured a human cargo vessel 6 months ago. They had studied it and learned how to copy its design. The ship would look human from the outside, but inside it had Zephyrian technology. It would be perfect for this mission. 3 days later, Kethvar was ready to leave. He stood in the launch bay looking at his disguised ship. It was ugly compared to Zephyrian vessels. Human ships had no grace, no beauty. They were built for function, not art. Everything about them seemed rushed and crude. Remember, Commander Veltar spoke through the communication device. You are there to observe only. Do not interfere. Do not help either side. We need facts, not emotions. Watch how they fight. Learn their strengths and weaknesses. Find out if they can win against the Thrakari. Kethvar nodded and climbed into his ship. The engines started with a low hum, much quieter than human engines would be. He lifted off from Zephyr Prime and set course for human space. The journey would take 2 weeks through hyperspace. During the trip, Kethvar studied more human files. Their military structure was strange. They had ranks like other species, but they seemed to care about individual soldiers in ways that made no sense. Commanders would risk entire missions to save single troops. They had ceremonies for dead soldiers, even ones who were not important. They also had something called emotions that seemed to control their actions. The file said humans could become angry, sad, or afraid, and these feelings would change how they fought. To Kethvar, this seemed like a terrible weakness. Zephyrians had learned to control such things thousands of years ago. Clear thinking won wars, not feelings. The ship dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of human territory. Kethvar immediately activated his stealth systems and began scanning for activity. He was in the Vega system, where intelligence reports said there was heavy fighting between humans and Thrakari forces. His sensors picked up several human ships near the 4th planet. There was a mining colony there called New Denver. The colony had about 50,000 humans living on it. It produced rare metals that both sides needed for their ships. Kethvar moved his ship closer, staying hidden behind a large asteroid. His sensors showed him everything in detail. There were 5 human ships protecting the colony. The largest was a destroyer called the USS Defiance. The human captain was named Jake Morrison according to the communication intercepts. The ship was damaged. Kethvar could see burn marks on its hull and several weapon systems that were not working. The other human ships were in similar condition. They looked like they had been fighting for days without rest. These humans are fools, Kethvar said to himself. They should retreat and save their ships. The colony is not worth losing everything, but the humans stayed. They formed a defensive line around the planet and waited. Their communications showed they knew Thrakari reinforcements were coming. They knew they were outnumbered, but they did not leave. Kethavar set up his observation equipment and began recording everything. He would watch this battle and see how humans really fought. He expected to see them break and run when the real fighting started. All species did when faced with impossible odds. His sensors detected new ships approaching. 3 Thrakari cruisers and a battle carrier were coming from the outer system. The human ships would be destroyed easily. The colony would fall. It would be a quick lesson in why young species should not fight older ones. The human captain, Jake Morrison, sent a message to his fleet. All ships, this is Morrison. We know what's coming. We know the odds, but those are our people down there. We don't abandon our own. We hold the line. No matter what, Kethavar was confused by this. The captain was choosing certain death for what seemed like no logical reason. The colony could be evacuated. The humans could retreat and fight another day. Why throw away ships and lives for a piece of rock in space? As the Thrakari ships got closer, Kethavar settled in to watch his first human battle. He expected it to be over quickly. He expected the humans to die badly and accomplish nothing. He thought this would be a simple lesson in why his people should side with the Thrakari. He had no idea that what he was about to see would change him forever. Kethavar had not truly slept in weeks. His rest cycles had become periods of emotional torment, where the faces of dead humans and Thrakari haunted his consciousness. He understood now why he could no longer achieve the peaceful shutdown that had sustained him for 5 centuries of life. The humans had infected him with something his species had deliberately evolved beyond. They had given him the ability to care about individual suffering, to feel personal loss for beings he had never met, to experience grief for enemies as deeply as for friends. His final observation mission took him to the Battle of Titan's Gate, where Admiral Ben Tucker commanded the human fleet in what everyone knew would be the last major engagement of the war. Intelligence reports indicated that the Thrakari High Command was preparing to sue for peace, but they wanted one final victory to strengthen their negotiating position. Tucker had 12 ships against a Thrakari fleet of 40 vessels. The mathematics remained impossible, but Kethavar no longer expected mathematical logic to determine the outcome. He had learned that humans fought with weapons that could not be measured by conventional tactical analysis. The battle began with the Thrakari demanding surrender. Admiral Tucker's response was broadcast across both fleets and intercepted by Kethavar's sensors. To the Thrakari commander, "This is Admiral Tucker of the Terran Defense Force. We cannot accept your terms because they do not include protection for civilian populations in this system. We propose alternative terms. Allow us to evacuate all non-combatants, human and Thrakari alike, and we will withdraw our military forces without resistance." The Thrakari commander was confused by this offer. "Admiral Tucker, you are in no position to negotiate. Surrender your ships and we will consider mercy for your crews." Tucker's reply revealed the fundamental difference between human and conventional warfare. "Commander, we're not negotiating from a position of strength. We're offering you a chance to end this fight without anyone dying unnecessarily. Take the civilians out of the equation, and then we can settle this like honorable warriors." The Thrakari refused the offer and began their attack. But something unprecedented happened during the opening exchange of fire. When a Thrakari cruiser was crippled by human missiles, instead of finishing it off, Captain Rachel Taylor of the destroyer Hope's End moved to protect the damaged enemy ship. "Hope's End to all vessels," Taylor transmitted. "The Thrakari ship Swift Death is disabled and venting atmosphere. I'm covering their evacuation procedures. Any ship that fires on their escape pods answers to me personally." Taylor positioned her destroyer between the crippled Thrakari cruiser and the rest of the enemy fleet, using her own ship as a shield while alien crew members evacuated to safety. Her actions prevented a massacre, but they also left her ship vulnerable to concentrated enemy fire. The Thrakari response was unlike anything in their military history. Instead of taking advantage of Taylor's position, the enemy fleet held their fire until the evacuation was complete. When the last Thrakari escape pod reached safety, both fleets resumed combat as if by mutual agreement. Engineer Rachel Taylor, no relation to Captain Taylor, commanded the repair crews aboard the human flagship. When Thrakari boarding pods attached to the hull, instead of repelling them with standard security measures, she did something that defied explanation. She had installed emergency escape systems on the Thrakari boarding pods. "Why are you helping enemy soldiers escape if their attack fails?" her assistant engineer asked as they activated the additional life support systems. Taylor continued her work, ensuring that even enemy attackers would have a chance to survive if their assault went wrong. "Because when this war is over, some Thrakari soldier is going to go home to his family instead of dying in space. That matters more than winning." The escape systems she had installed secretly saved 43 Thrakari Marines when their boarding action failed and their pods were damaged by defensive fire. Instead of dying in the vacuum of space, they were able to return safely to their ships. When the Thrakari discovered what Taylor had done, they responded with their own act of unprecedented mercy. They began installing similar emergency systems on their own weapons, ensuring that human casualties could be recovered and treated rather than left to die. Captain Gary Wright commanded the Marine defense of the human flagship. When Thrakari soldiers breached the main corridor, instead of establishing killing zones and fighting to the death, he organized what he called a civilized war. Wright met the Thrakari commander in hand-to-hand combat, while their respective troops formed honor circles around them. It was like an ancient duel, with both sides agreeing to let individual skill determine the outcome, rather than engaging in mass slaughter. "Your people fight with great honor," the Thrakari officer said as they circled each other with energy blades. "Why do you make war so personal?" Wright parried a strike and responded with careful precision. "Because war is personal. Every person who dies has a name and a family and dreams they'll never achieve. We can't pretend that doesn't matter." The duel lasted an hour, with both commanders fighting at the peak of their abilities. When Wright finally emerged victorious, instead of claiming conquest, he helped the wounded Thrakari officer to the medical bay and ensured he received proper treatment. The most psychologically devastating moment for Kepler came when he intercepted a private communication from Lieutenant Colonel Karen Phillips to her 5-year-old daughter back on Earth. Phillips was dying from radiation exposure after manually repairing the ship's damaged reactor, and she knew she would never see her child again. "Hi, baby girl. It's Mommy," Phillips said into her personal communicator as her body slowly shut down from radiation poisoning. "I want you to know that Mommy is helping people right now. There are some alien friends who need to get home to their families, and Mommy is making sure they get there safely." Phillips was referring to a group of Thrakari civilians who had been trapped on the human ship when the battle started. Instead of treating them as enemy prisoners, she had assigned Marines to protect them and was personally ensuring their safe return to Thrakari lines. "When you grow up, I want you to remember that helping people is the most important thing anyone can do," Phillips continued, her voice weakening as the radiation sickness progressed. "It doesn't matter if they look different or speak different languages. People are people, and they all deserve kindness." Phillips died holding the hand of a young Thrakari child who had been separated from her parents during the battle. Her last words were a lullaby in the Thrakari language, learned from prisoners during previous engagements. The battle reached its climax when Admiral Tucker made the decision that would haunt Kepler for the rest of his existence. The human fleet was defeated, their ships crippled or destroyed. But instead of surrendering, Tucker activated the self-destruct systems on his flagship, but not to kill enemies, to save them. The human flagship was carrying a cargo of medical supplies intended for Thrakari civilian populations on occupied worlds. Tucker's final act was to broadcast the location of supply caches and medical facilities to the enemy fleet, ensuring that humanitarian aid would reach those who needed it. To the Thrakari commander, Tucker transmitted as his ship's systems began shutting down. "The war is ending and your people will need medical care for the wounded. We're transmitting coordinates for supply depots and field hospitals. Use them well. Take care of your people and take care of ours." The Thrakari fleet commander was silent for several minutes before responding. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an emotion that Kepler had never heard from a Thrakari before. "Respect. Admiral Tucker, your surrender is accepted with full military honors. Your wounded will receive the same medical care as our own. Your dead will be buried with ceremony befitting their courage. This I swear by the honor of my ancestors." The formal surrender ceremony was unlike anything in galactic military history. Thrakari soldiers stood at attention as human survivors were transferred to medical ships. Human officers were allowed to keep their personal weapons as symbols of respect. Both fleets observed a moment of silence for all casualties, regardless of species. But the most significant moment came when the Thrakari commander presented Admiral Tucker with a medal from his own uniform, an honor normally reserved for Thrakari heroes. "You have taught us that strength is not measured by the ability to destroy enemies," the Thrakari commander said. "True strength is the ability to help enemies become friends. Your people fight like demons, but they love like angels." As Kethvar watched the aftermath of the battle, he finally understood what was happening to him. The humans had not infected him with a psychological disorder. They had awakened something that had been dormant in his consciousness for millennia. They had taught him how to feel empathy for individual suffering. They had shown him that caring about others, even enemies, was not a weakness but a strength that transcended species barriers. They had demonstrated that consciousness was not just about intelligence and logic, but about the ability to choose compassion even in the face of necessary violence. That night, Kethvar began composing his final report to Zephyrian High Command. But it was not the tactical analysis they had requested. It was something far more dangerous to his species.